We are a tiny speck on the map surrounded by 400 million Arabs, most of whom have a religious-based anti-Semitism. And now there is this rising regional power bent on murdering us and rushing to a nuclear arsenal. So even people who don't like Netanyahu have begun to say, wait a minute. You cannot convince with facts and analysis a person whose sense of moral superiority rests on ignorance. And their moral arrogance has given them a waiver from being interested in the details. If you want solidarity, the way to achieve it is not to rub shoulders with the destructive, divisive elements. I think that the divisive elements are like a fire that you need to put out. So the people who are encouraging refusals and a mutiny in the army are tearing apart the fabric of our common existence. And therefore, the answer to that is not trying to make peace with them. The answer for that is taking a strong stand against them. Zionism set all Jews free because for the first time in 2,000 years, diaspora became a choice and not a fate.
The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
We're on. Welcome to the Jew Function. Welcome everybody. Seth, hi. How you doing?
Hi, Leo.
I'm in Israel. Seth is in America. That's
no bombs. A lot of drama, but no bombs here.
Here, bombs, not so much drama, but it became like a routine of sorts. But we're not here to talk about the bombs. I mean, we might talk about it, but it's actually an opportunity to not talk about that, to take a longer view of things and talk about our favorite problem. And things have been accelerating. You probably seen the videos from Amsterdam that came out and what was going on there. And some people call it an all-out pogrom. The good old, everybody dusted that word out and we're ready to use it. I don't know if it was a pogrom, but there's definitely a sense that like these boundaries are being broken. It doesn't matter the country. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's Holland, it's Spain, it's France, it's everywhere where there's people who don't like Jews, they feel more comfortable acting out. And I think that's the trend that we're seeing everywhere. And it's only a question of when everybody will realize, oh my God, you know what? There's only 15 million of them. Let's just band together and finish this job, right? I'm amazed that this hasn't happened yet. So this in itself is a melon scratcher. But maybe there's a reason for that. We definitely have a view on things, and what I'm happy to see and to say is that I'm seeing more and more people turning to independent media like this podcast and other podcasts to get their news and views. So I think we're this is going to be a good year for opening people's minds. Is this the same? Are people still latched onto general media, mainstream media, back in the US of A or after?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of people who are, but also behind what you also get. It's very interesting how these things work out. What you also get when you have the crowd who's getting a lot of independent media, then you also get all the problems are the Jews' fault. They don't like explicitly say that in mainstream media, but along with the freedom for each person to publish their own opinion and to hear a lot of different opinions, a lot of people connect a lot of dots, and with only a small amount of information is very dangerous. And so there's a lot of I'm sure we'll also see a lot of connections and finger pointing towards the Jews also.
Oh, well, we're already seeing it, but also it was refreshing somewhat to see CNN and one of the one of the commentators there, taking a moment to reprimand everyone around them for this biased coverage of the elections and the campaigns, and like we have a partner, like maybe TV can change. I don't know, but what I do know is that more people are listening, and this is good. And I hope we can. We brought here a fellow podcaster. He's way more successful than us. I'm not ashamed to say it, but he's already the second podcaster. No, actually the fourth. We've had several. We've had podcast. We had AJ Steele. We had Charles, right? And then I had a conversation with an Israeli podcaster just a couple of weeks ago, and now this guy, which I'm very happy to introduce in a minute, because first of all, I've known him. It turned out for years. We actually met in the army. He was in the reserve. I was serving my regular service, but then I met him years later. I saw his, I read, I kind of followed his transition from writing for Haaretz, like this very left-wing newspaper, and gradually moving to the center and even to the right, and changing his views. He's a lecturer. I met him also in a lecture just a year and a half ago or 2 years ago about the new anti-Semitism, and specifically he made this connection between the rise of woke policies and progressive policies, and connected that with anti-Zionism and post-Zionism and that whole salad, and how it's actually hurting us, and those self-hating Jews abroad are also promoting policies that hurt Israel. And in short, he already had a tremendous point of view, and with his podcast, The Gatekeeper, he brings some amazing people, and he offers a mind-blowing perspective. Sadly, it's not in English, maybe only a few episodes. Most of it is in Hebrew, and it's worth learning Hebrew just for that. So he's a writer, he's a commentator. I think he worked also with Tablet Magazine. He got his PhD from Rutgers University. I'm probably skipping some of the other titles, but he's an all-around great guy, and I'm very happy to have him on the Jew Function today. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Gadi Taub. Ta-da!
Gadi.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction.
Yeah, I got most of the points.
You overdid it. Yeah, I'm not going to correct you on any of that.
Okay, good. So, this is a very special time, and you have, I think you have a very special place where you are today, at least in the Israeli media, in that landscape, independent media. You've done tremendous work with your podcast and everything, and I think you got to speak to a lot of very interesting people. I mean, for example, on your podcast, I got to actually hear and understand what the judicial reform is all about. I think your podcast was the only place where you could actually sit for an hour and actually listen to what this thing is all about. Because up until then, it was just like guys with signs, shouting on the street. And by the way, a good friend of mine is a member of the Knesset, and I still didn't get what was the reform about. So
that's actually my greatest claim to fame in the podcast, was that the Minister of Justice Yariv Levin chose this podcast to introduce the reform. He had a short press conference of 10 minutes, but he came to this podcast to speak for an hour and 10 minutes and explain what it was all about. And the mainstream media was very angry. They said Yariv Levin is not talking to the public. He went to this niche podcast to lay out his reform, but they should have looked at themselves. They are so intent on showing their leftist credentials by attacking right-wing politicians and not letting them finish a single sentence, that they should not be surprised that anyone who wants to lay out a serious argument about a serious reform does not go to a channel 12 studio where they will just attack him with a barrage of constant questions.
Right. So people, just for people who don't know, for the Jews who don't speak Hebrew, most of the media here in Israel is pretty much overrun by people with interests who are more aligned with the left or the minority. I think I could even say, right? It's not even a left so much; it's a minority. Maybe you can give people who are listening And we have quite a few listeners, and not just Jews in America. We have people all over the world listening to this. Maybe you can give a little overview of sort of like the social political landscape. Like what's the situation in Israel now? A year into the war, are we more united, less united? Give us a little, like, where are we? Are we on the brink of civil war? Just so we understand. Okay, so maybe you can give us just a little overview.
No, the camps are still the same two camps, but I think one is shrinking and one is enlarging, and there's also a larger middle that's maybe more confused. But if you see what is happening now, there are new investigations against Netanyahu, right? By eerily by the Secret Service, by the Shabak. Who are investigating, they say only his office, the people around him. But of course, we know that trick. And if you compare this to the reform days or to Netanyahu's legal predicament, you will see that Netanyahu is much more confident to call them out now and say this is political. He more or less said that. And he attacked them directly. Why? Because I think he knows now that the attempts to take him down by using law enforcement will not work in the middle of a war when he not only represents but also acts in the name of the actual will of the majority of Israelis, which is to win. So the mainstream media keeps distorting the picture, but note what Netanyahu has done from the beginning of this war. From the first minute, everybody laughed at him in the beginning. He said total victory. These are the war aims. We're not going left or right. We are going to pursue them until the end. And all his detractors from the opposition and all their political machinations were in the shadow of the real concern of the Israeli public, and this is why they failed. Benny Gantz was at one point popular like Netanyahu, some said even more, but that's because he joined the government and joined the bandwagon of victory. When he left government, his numbers fell precipitously. So I think that what you are seeing now in Israel is greater solidarity among the wider societies, especially the army. And then the anti-Netanyahu crowd is becoming an autistic echo chamber. And they are, if you speak to these people, they tell you, ever since this war began, the country is just going from one disaster to another. That's not how Israelis see it. We did much more than anyone believed that we could do against Hamas. Then we did far more than that against Hezbollah, and Netanyahu has slowly and steadily maneuvered to make this war a regional war in the sense that it is a war against Iran. He didn't make it a war against Iran, but he made it clear that for him this is a war against Iran, and he refused to go for a ceasefire before victory in Gaza. In Lebanon, I hope he insists. There are now contradictory news stories, right. And finally against Iran.
So,
Gadi, there's got.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind. Okay, so there's always got to be. You never have a unanimous. There's always two sides at least in everything. It's just how things are. But what is the ideological vision of the side that's against Netanyahu?
I think that many of these
and what would they be happy? If they got their way, what would that world look like?
They were certainly depressed that Trump won the election in the United States, because their whole worldview centers on one argument, which is that demography is a rising danger to Zionism, and so if we don't partition the land, we will end up in a Muslim majority society. That's their analysis, and in their
this is the left's analysis.
Yeah, the hardcore left, and which includes almost all the media. And so, in their view, the first goal is to remove the right from power, so as to open the possibility of a two-state solution, probably by American imposition. They don't think they can convince the Israeli public, but they wanted to use the hostage question in order to force Israel to conceding defeat in this war or finishing it without victory, so that Israel will be weaker and more pliant, so that a democratic administration in America could force us back into the two-states track. That's
so let me understand. So there's people there who feel that we need a Jewish country, and in order to have a safe Jewish country, we need to have two states, and we'll keep our enemies in their state, and they'll leave us alone in our state. So
but this thing, weren't we in that?
Hold on. I just want to
understand
understand it step by step, because I didn't know that. I didn't realize that's where you're going to go with the answer. I'm kind of shocked by it, but so their feeling is we do that. So they are pro-Jew, pro-Israel. They think that this is the way that they'll be safe. So at the root of it, it's still this scared person who wants to just be safe. Just wants to have a place that they feel safe in, right?
Yeah,
is that what we're talking about?
They want a Jewish majority. That's the gist of it, and
so this is what the left wants.
Yeah, that's what the Zionist left wants, and this is a shrinking. This is the Zionist left is a shrinking constituency, and then there's the radical left, which doesn't want a Jewish state.
Right, that's what I thought you were talking about.
Haaretz, Amos Shoken, these people, they want what they call a state of all its citizens. They want Israel. They don't confess it always, but this is what they want. The Haaretz is bent on the destruction of Zionism, and this is not an exaggeration. They sometimes even say so themselves. But the
this is not who you're talking about.
Yeah, the mainstream media is mostly left Zionist, and so thinks that, I thought so once myself, that partition is the only way to save the Jewish democratic state from sinking into binationalism with an Arab majority. But what I object to in your rephrasing of it is that this would be safe. It's not about safety. Everybody knows that safety is very far off. It's just that the right thinks that if the demographic problem awaits us somewhere down the road, if we go for partition, Israel would be destroyed far earlier than it would be demographically, as we have, and this was reinforced on October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to understand. As I mentioned, that we went down this path before. Why do they think something different is going to come out of it this time around? Are they just mad? I mean,
no, they're not mad. They just can't let go of their own dream, which is, I try to write a piece about it. This is a dream that my friend Pandit Irit Linur calls, they dream of Zionism in a very minimalistic way as just Sweden in Hebrew. It's not really Jewish in any meaningful sense, except that we are another European country, except we speak another language. And that dream of a normal European country depends on peace with the Palestinians. So the left has formulated history and the history of the Oslo Accord in this way. Once there was a brave statesman named Yitzhak Rabin. He put down arms and decided to go for peace. But then some guy named Baruch Goldstein committed a terror attack on innocent Muslim at prayer, killed 29 of them and wounded 125. And so that brought about Palestinian terrorism, and that brought Netanyahu to power, and Netanyahu destroyed I skipped over the Rabin assassination. In the middle, the right shot Rabin in order to remove him, and so the cycle is Baruch Goldstein, then Palestinian terrorism, then someone shot Rabin, and their peace was murdered by the right, and then that gave rise to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu has destroyed the Oslo Accord. So,
hold on. In the middle there was Ehud Barak in the middle there. He was also ready to make concessions, give away everything the other side wanted.
This story is such complete BS. That
Yeah, okay. I just
when
want to
when I was interviewed to a new series done by Channel One, which is Israel's PBS. It's publicly financed. I saw.
They're also anti-Semitic?
No, they're not. They're just.
No, you said Israel's BBC. So
No, I said PBS.
Oh, PBS. I'm sorry.
So they are, but they are leftist. So that's the story they tell. And once I realized that's the narrative they're imposing, I demanded to take out my parts in it, because I abhor this. This is just, it's a lie. And in the middle of this lie, there's also a lie that Benjamin Netanyahu incited to violence against Rabin, which is a complete lie, because whenever he heard someone saying that Rabin is a traitor, he reprimanded the public, the crowd. He said he's not a traitor. He's a political adversary. We are all one people. And so, but this story, the gist of this story is that the reason for the failure of the peace process is Israeli recalcitrance and not Palestinian recalcitrance, which is, of course, the Palestinians never, ever agreed to Jewish sovereign presence in the land of Israel, no matter what borders, never, ever. And when we left them in Gaza, Gaza was disengagement. We unilaterally withdraw. I supported the Gaza withdrawal because I said, you mentioned Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak, the logic that of Ehud Barak's move was the Oslo process with all its terror attacks was supposed to build trust. Instead, it was eroding trust. So he said, let's cut the Gordian knot. We know what we know what the middle is between the two positions. Let's cut it in the middle and go straight to the issues at the heart of the conflict: refugees, Jerusalem, and borders. And he proposed to Arafat more than the Israeli public could stomach. And Arafat still said no. And after that, the peace process was finally dead. But we still thought of a two-state solution, or I did, and enough Israelis to support disengagement from Gaza. Disengagement is
it? So is it not clear? Is it not clear that it's a very Western mentality that you're talking about amongst the Israelis?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very different mentality than the Arab mentality. It doesn't occur to your countrymen there that there's two different mentalities here.
No.
Also, no, doesn't occur.
Now it does, but I mean, the right kept screaming it, and of course, the left said you are all racists. But
yes.
So I have a question on that, because I mean, we can kind of get more into the more and more granular about the politics of it, but I think it's clear. The picture is somewhat clear. My question is, you're a media person. We're media people. We keep hearing, there's different people talk about different narratives, right? And trying to spin a story this way or that way, and we'll rewrite history this way or that way. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with other people, and you're dealing with other maybe forces all around you. How do you explain that people sort of subject themselves to the narrative rather than just looking at what's right before them? Looking at the personalities, the people, the desires of the people, the forces that shape decisions here. Why are we getting stuck to the narrative, such a postmodernistic term, rather than the facts on the ground, the realities on the ground? What do you think? Is this psychosis? What's happening here?
It's very, very hard to let go of your dreams. And so you find a way to squeeze the facts into the matrix of your narrative and ignore whatever doesn't fit it. Look, the chief of military intelligence in Israel, the former chief, Tamir Heyman, and in Israel, the chief of military intelligence is also the director of national intelligence, said 2 months before the war, he said, I keep getting phone calls of people worried that the war is going to start. And no war is going to start, he said. And he said, I don't need to look at the intelligence because I know what the interests are, and they have no interest in attacking us. So you see the conceptia, as we say in the loaded Hebrew term, of a misleading form of groupthink. Their calculation were Hamas has brought relative economic prosperity with the help of Israel to the Gaza Strip, and so no one would start a war because I don't know if it's the exact phrasing from Obama, but I heard him say something to that effect. Everyone wants a decent job, to put food on the table, and to bring their children up in a safe environment. Isn't that trivial? Well, no, it's not. This was our calculation. This is not Yahya Sinwar's calculation. And you're completely right, Seth, that we project our mentality on them, and I'd say even more, we project our misunderstanding of ourselves on them, because we also think of ourselves in these narrow materialistic terms.
Are there certain things that both groups do share in common? Is there, for example, places, instead of going to the most painful separation points, are there certain points that everybody shares in common and we could build from that?
We share very similar bodies. We are both believers in monotheistic religions.
Wait, hold on. Seth, are you talking about left and right, or are you talking about Arabs and Jews? Just so it's clear.
Left and right.
I don't think anyone else is doing what we're doing, and yeah, and that's exactly it. Nobody can comprehend what we're talking about. Who would even say that anti-Semites have anything valuable to say without saying we're anti-Semitic or we're self-hating Jews? But there's something that everybody's missing in this whole picture, and the reason why the solution is so close is because we're not waiting for anyone else to change. We're not waiting for the laws to be enacted. We're not waiting for a new politician to get elected. The answer is way closer than everybody thinks.
Like us, hit the bell thing on the YouTube so you can get a notification when a new episode is up. Well, this is the Jew function, and let's get back to our guest.
Left and right.
Specifically, just amongst ourselves first.
We do share a lot, but there is an awful lot of incitement that's so wild that it's really difficult to converse. And I have lost many friends. Some just announced point blank that I'm beyond the pale, and they would not talk to me. People who were my allies at the Hebrew University, including a very, very now dead prominent professor, perhaps the most prominent professor in social sciences in Israel, who was very instrumental in my difficult tenor battle, just completely renounced me and began delegitimizing me as a scholar. So it's very, very vicious. And he's not a useful idiot. He is a sophisticated player. But what they did and by the way, he was silent all along the reform battle. What they did in the reform is they lied to a huge public that the right is conspiring to impose on Israel they called it messianic dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing Yariv Levin.
Same kind of thing happened here.
What?
So, I mean, in a different way, a similar thing just happened.
Yeah. And it's and you know this, and how do you convince people who still believe that Donald Trump said that some of the Nazis are very fine people? I had an argument with a Jewish doctor, I mean an MD, in a congregation in Texas, where I gave a lecture, and when he told me, he says the Nazis are very fine people, and I said, this has been debunked a million times, and he said, no, it hasn't, and huffed and puffed and walked away. And so they think that's the devil, and then you can't. How can you make peace with the devil? These people, in the midst of the war, the people who were active in the struggle against the reform, they had a conference, and I have the video, and one of their major speakers said, and they repeat this often, the real enemy is not Hamas. The real enemy is the enemy from within. And that's Benjamin Netanyahu. And so people speak about Netanyahu in deranged terms. And this person, Netanyahu, when we look back on this war, we will all compare him to Churchill. I'm saying this as a historian. I'm not defending his participation in the conception before the war, although he had very little room for maneuver. But what he did since this war began, in the face of a hostile American administration who's been trying to shut down the war from about 3 weeks into it or so, and by the way, wanted to prevent any ground incursion from the beginning, with an extremely hostile press, with a state bureaucracy that's insubordinate, and with a brass in the IDF and the Shabak who want to stop the war and are basically not exactly obeying him. And as you know, this whole war started when the chief of Shabak, the director of Shabak, Ronen Bar, and Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, had a consultation late at night between the 6th and 7th of October, decided not to wake up the Minister of Defense or the Prime Minister, decided to reconvene at 8 o'clock and went to sleep. And so they basically cut off the elected echelons, or the politicians, the representatives of the sovereign public, and decided that it was up to them. And since I know them and know the rhetoric, I can tell you what they thought. They have convinced themselves that this is a radical, crazy, a messianic coalition, and it was their job to be the gatekeepers. This is the name of my podcast, and there's a reason. And they are the gatekeepers. And so they must not let this important information fall into the hands of the crazy prime minister, lest he start a war because of it. So it's their, and they have, gatekeeper has become a phrase in Hebrew where our civil servants decided that it is their job to stop politicians from doing what they want, because
is it a known
civil
thing?
servants, they represent the public interest, and the politicians are just self-interested. This is the philosophy.
Is it a known thing that they prevented the message from getting to
Oh
the
yeah,
people
yeah,
who?
absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
It just
And-
came
and
out
just-
officially. There was just now what's her name?
Now there's a whole.
They must be burying their heads in
I just
shame.
wanted to mention that this is when they began developing this ethos in which they are the actual trustees of the public good, and politicians are just a force of evil. Then I called my podcast, ironically, Shomer Hasaf, Gatekeeper. And then on my 100th episode, I did an interview with Netanyahu, and he was then head of the opposition. And I saw he didn't want a political one, so I said, why don't we do a discussion of history? Choose 3 leaders that you see as role models and explain why you see them as role models. And he said yes. And then I go to his office in the Metzudat Ze'ev, it is opposition office, and I start the podcast, and I said, welcome to Gatekeeper. And he said, what did you just say? He is just, his ears, I could see them perking, because this is the term by which democracy is undermined here. And of course, he is personally attacked.
So I think what would be interesting if you can answer for Americans who are listening, and a lot, half the country voted for Trump, more than half probably voted for Trump, and now they're expecting him to go in and drain the swamp, continue draining the swamp, and clean out the deep state and all that stuff. Why doesn't a similar thing happen in Israel? I think a lot of people are asking, and I don't know enough of the political. All I know is that people are saying, well, if he does this, there's going to be civil war. If he does this, but really, why can't he fire people who are not, who are not towing the line of the war effort of the political party that's now have been voted in by the majority? Like, what's the story? What's stopping him? Maybe you can.
Question. First of all, Trump has not dried the swamp yet. He said he will.
No, yeah, it's a big swamp.
He said he will last time, and we know what happened. They managed to undermine him. I think you say 6 ways from Sunday. They found many ways to undermine him, and one of them was a bogus investigation, which is, I just finished recording a segment for my Hebrew podcast after I did this with Mike Duran for Israel Update, for our English-speaking podcast, which compares and says, look, this is the James Comey playbook. They have an investigation in order to undermine Trump. Then he gets elected. Now they get an investigation against Trump, so he can't find out what they did. So Netanyahu had a run with judicial reform, which is Israel's version of drawing the swamp. And it ran into a lot of money, organized public protest, and finally a threat of a coup. This is how the reform failed. So Netanyahu, although he is the longest serving prime minister, still is up against very strong centers of power, which he has not managed to find to master conclusively. So how did the reform fail? It failed because the miserable Minister Gallant, instead of suppressing threats of a mutiny in the army, just put himself at the head of the mutiny and crossed the Rubicon into politics and threatened to that Israel's security was in danger if the reform continues. So at that point, there was Leil Gallant, the night of Gallant. Netanyahu fired Gallant, but then the country erupted in demonstrations, and then on top of the mutiny in the army, the Histadrut, the roof organization of unions, threatened to paralyze the economy. And at that point, Netanyahu said, we're postponing the reform. So he tried, and it didn't work. But now he did fire Gallant, and all the left WhatsApp groups were full of, let's do a second Gallant night. And then there were just a few thousand, because these people don't realize that Netanyahu has become the leader of the Jewish nation in a time of an existential war. That's how Israelis perceive him. And
how many, does a majority of people feel that way?
I think so. Support for Netanyahu is rising. And
because
this does not mean that that they like him. What?
Right. Because it's existential. I think that's what happened here also in the elections. People feel like my life is getting shitty. Like I need just.
Yeah, but my life is getting
things.
shitty is not exactly like being nuked by Iran.
Okay. No, but in America, dude, if you can buy a McDonald's meal for under $9,
that's our version.
If you can, it's there. People are freaked out, because
let me defend the Americans. I think Americans are highly idealistic. It's just that materialism is part of their ideal. But Americans are not just moral, but excessively moralistic, and often their foreign policy is also dictated by moral principles. So it's not so. But the peril here is it's not comparable. We are a tiny speck on the map, surrounded by 400 million Arabs, most of whom have a religious-based anti-Semitism, and now there is this rising regional power bent on murdering us and rushing to a nuclear arsenal. So even people who don't like Netanyahu have begun to say, wait a minute, not now, not in the middle of a war, because however you frame it, Netanyahu is. So now, of course, they're trying to say he's running the war badly, but that's not convincing. So now, whatever else you think of Netanyahu, the majority of Israelis think that is not important. What is important is winning this war, and of course the left will keep, because I've got in trouble because trouble with them is no longer trouble for me. But I've said repeatedly, the left in Israel is the sector of the public with the lowest political literacy. You can make them believe any BS you want if you have the right people saying it and repeating it from the echo chamber of the press. They keep saying to this. I just had the weekend papers saying once again that we would have had the hostages, except that Netanyahu sabotaged the deal. And then there's Jake Sullivan on 60 Minutes saying the reason we don't have a hostage deal is because Hamas keeps refusing. And they will keep saying it's Netanyahu. And the Saturday night demonstrators in Kaplan Street will keep screaming that bring back the hostages, as if it was up to him and it's just his fault. So these people, I think we have a press that has dumbed down people so much that you can make them believe Netanyahu is a Nazi. You can make them believe that.
If people are so malleable and can be made to believe anything, so why?
Leftists, not people. It's not all people. I mean, what happened is, I'm kidding. What happened in Israel is that the right has become more and more savvy and more intelligence. And I know this. I just had this quote from Thomas Sowell. I'm probably rephrasing it. It's ruining it. But he said, "You cannot convince with facts and analysis a person whose sense of moral superiority rests on ignorance." And this is what we're up against. You know how many I've had with smart people, people who are they don't have a deficiency. It's just that their education and their habits and their moral arrogance has given them a waiver from being interested in the details. And so I've had an argument with a good friend, and every topic we argued about, she said, well, I don't know the facts about this one, but Ben Gvir's driver just passed a red light and ran over someone. And I said, okay, but Ben Gvir, they're saying this and that about it. I don't know about that, but look, the hostages are wasting away in the tunnels, and you people are flying in Kanaf Tzion, and his wife wants to go to a cocktail in the UN, and this is what, and then you explain why the UN speech is actually not just a weekend trip, but is important, and then they change the subject again, and their sense that the right is evil is so deeply entrenched in their identity, not just in their opinions, that there is that any specific argument that you pick is irrelevant.
So I want to take now the long view, because so we spent the first half trying to
that was not the long view.
Well, no, that was a medium shot. I want to take a long shot, like a really long shot, because in the Jew function, we really like to look at the whole scope of things. And you studied history, and we also studied history. We don't have a doctorate in history. We're not professors of history, but we did spend time looking at looking for historic patterns, right? Of what happens in history when we do something, and then what's the reaction from the world, and vice versa. And you also talk about it in your writings a lot, about the reactions of the world to certain things, right? Like the reaction to Zionism. Zionism is a reaction to certain behavior, but then the reaction of the world to Zionism, and so on and so forth. It seems like there's this ongoing, right, dynamic. And we looked at that dynamic, and the one thing that became very, very clear, beyond the statistical error, is that whenever Jews can't get their shit together, the other type of shit hits the fan. Okay, basically, I don't know if it's like if you could go and empirically measure each instance, because it happened in the past, but there's enough records to show that when Jews are at each other's necks, since the first temple, second temple, all that, there's always trouble, all the way up to today. The October 6th. The level of separation between the Jews. So the first question would be, do you happen to see that too, or is this like some weird idea for you? And if you do happen to agree with it, what are we doing? What are we going to do about it? Because we can sort of argue the details here and there, but like, how are we getting out of this rut, this endless cycle, where we've given well, I've said enough.
I often am criticized for employing combative rhetoric.
Right, you're considered a militant.
Yeah, and nobody knows why. And I think that if you want solidarity, the way to achieve it is not to rub shoulders with the destructive, divisive elements. I think that the divisive elements are like a fire that you need to put out. So the people who are encouraging refusals and a mutiny in the army are tearing apart the fabric of our common existence. And therefore, the answer to that is not trying to make peace with them. The answer for that is taking a strong stand against them. And this is basically my stance towards them. I think it's very, very destructive. But I think that these elites, and this was my book. My book was called Ne'adim V'Nayachim, the mobile and the sedentary. I guess, and everybody compared it to David Goodhart's the somewheres and the anywheres. But the thesis was actually different. And what I said is there is a small elite which is deeply anti-democratic and is trying to separate itself from the majority of citizens, which she sees as lowbrow idiots ready to break out into fascism at any moment. So in their analysis, the problem with democracy is the citizens with whom they don't like. And so the citizens are garbage, they are deplorables, they are bibistim, as they call them here. And so if you look at the Kaplan protest, and I tried to analyze that was after my book, but I was sort of ready to understand what was going on, because these people, their hatred or their problem is their fellow Jews. And they're not exactly anti-Semites, but for them, the idea of normality is to shed off Jewish particularism in favor of some, the Israeli version of Tikkun Olam, which is dilute Judaism into nothing and then only find it universal values. And so the way to normality is actually to distance yourself from all these weird Jews who are religious, messianic, Mizrahim, traditionalists, conservatives, right-wingers, all these crazies, because we are citizens of the world, and we will go to conferences abroad. And then, yeah.
No, I mean, this was very poetic, but I'm curious, don't they look back at the last, let's say, 2,000 years and of Jewish wisdom, the sages, everything that they talked about and wrote about, like just rising above the maybe the very simplistic Orthodox version of religion that maybe scares them. I know, because I grew up as a liberal, secular kid in North Tel Aviv.
It's any particularism, because they are universal. And so for them,
okay, so hold on. But
they don't like the Maccabees; they like King Herod.
Yeah, but we have a whole podcast on it, by the way, and it didn't work. It never works. Because there's always going to be forces, powerful forces from within the Jewish people that will reject that, resist that, and revolt against it. As we know, the story of Hanukkah is not us against the Greeks; it's us against the Hellenized Jews. It's Jews on Jews. The Greeks are just like, they're just fan the flames. That's part of what we're talking about in our podcast. It's always a Jew on Jew. That's what brings eventually the house down. And so I wonder, are they not looking at history? B, even in more modern times, that you cannot shed anything from my friend, a friend of a friend of a friend tells this joke about his grandfather in the First World War, and where they gathered the forces on one side of the border or another, I don't remember, and they ask, who belongs to, from this nation, and everybody goes, Hungarians this side, and Austrians this side, and eventually there's like one guy in the middle, what are you? Like, I'm cosmopolitan. Oh, he's just a Jew.
Yeah.
So like exactly. there's no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can convert, you can go again. It never worked. So I'm asking, like, that's what we're trying to do in our podcast. We're looking at all the excuses, all the arguments, all the proposed plans, and none of them worked. So
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, thank you.
But the fact that you and I think that this is the right lesson from history doesn't mean that everyone shares our view, regrettably.
That's okay. We don't need to agree on everything with everyone. I want to go to what you may think could be. I want you to actually touch on two things. One, because we never actually made it officially, we sort of took a little sidestep. But in your mind, what is the reason for the never-ending cycles of anti-Semitism? I'm curious to hear if you have an explanation, not just about the most recent iteration. And I know how you tie a nice package with with this the progressive worldview, and then the the Jew haters, and how that kind of brings us down, and that fans the hate against Israel. I know that, but again, a longer view of things. What do you think that? Why does it keep coming back? Why does it never go away? And then, what do you think could be a solution to that? But start with the first part first. The easy.
Well, that's a small marginal question you're asking. I have no answer. I had talk with Avi Bareli. He's my favorite Israeli historian and one of the smartest people around. And one thing he said about it was that anti-Semitism defies historical analysis, because every time we think we found the common denominator and that we can step beyond it, we discover a reincarnation of the same ancient hate. Mind you, Zionists, for once, thought that this was the end of Zionism, because now we will be a people with a homeland and therefore like all peoples. And now Zionism, or anti-Zionism, is the new form of anti-Semitism. So we thought that if we move from a religiously based hatred to a racial-based hatred, and then to a hatred based on nationalism, that is, that we are a subversive element because we live, the protocols of the elders of Zion, that the Jews are not exactly a people, and they just subvert all other peoples. So Zionism was supposed to say, no, Jews are like all peoples. Let me quote the Declaration of Independence. It is the natural right of the Jewish people to be like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own sovereign state. And so if we normalize our existence and become a normal nation, then there would be no cause to hate us on national grounds, on the modern idiom of nationalism, or the postmodern, the post-World War II idiom. And then anti-Semitism is reincarnated in the idea that all peoples have a right to self-determination except the Jews.
Jew function is really it's a desperate attempt to change something about the rise in anti-Semitism that doesn't seem to go away, and looking at history usually ends with something terrible before we reach relative quiet again. But we don't want to reach something terrible. We want to do it now. So that's why we're doing this podcast. And if you like this, also consider leaving a small contribution on our Patreon channel. Right. We both have day jobs, by the way, so we're not hoping to make money from this. We're hoping to see some change of heart.
Any funds are used to get this out there, to get this to people. We consider this the same way you go out every day to get money to feed your family, put a roof over your head. This is also critically important to our future, to our safety, to a good world, not only for Jews, but for everyone.
Well, this is the Jew function, and let's get back to our guest.
All peoples have a right to self-determination except the Jews. So that is. You brought up really good points, which we struggled with in our in our show as well. The first question is there a common denominator? What if, instead of looking outside for a common denominator, a common reason for anti-Semitism, we look inside? When you keep hitting your head against the wall, eventually you're going to ask yourself, why do I keep walking into the wall? Well, you don't look for.
So it's almost like the modern medical. You're just constantly chasing my skin's breaking out, so I put an antibiotic cream, and I'm having problems with my bowel movement, so I do this. And then I'm having a problem with my this. It's everything except looking at the health of the body. It's just like patching every problem.
Yeah, but I don't know what it is within the Jewish people that I don't think I have any indication that it's our fault in any way, or that something within us, like for instance, like it was
maybe we take out fault and just say, you don't blame a 5-year-old, that he's at fault, that he didn't have a successful career yet. It's just that it's this unrealized potential.
Maybe something is out of balance. Maybe this is where kind of we're getting at, and again we're trying to sort of come at it together, because in addition to looking at historic patterns, which do point to a common denominator, and that is somehow something that an imbalanced attitude between us. This Jew on Jew thing always precedes a serious pogrom, exile. It always happened. Before that, it wasn't like Jews were in love and then someone came and into the bedroom. It was always, we were like always in the middle of killing each other, and then someone actually put us out of our misery almost. We spent 20 episodes talking about looking at history from Abraham to today, and you see it over and over and over and over again. So you could say is it causal, or is this just a coincidence? I don't know, but it's there. But the question is, maybe there's something that we are somehow behaving in a way that's taking us out of balance,
or unrealized potential yet. Maybe let's not cause it like
potential.
Fault or to blame or something like that.
That is not something I have a solution to, and I think if I ever come up with one, I'll write a book, and it would be a bestseller.
So look, the other thing we study besides historic patterns is also words of Jewish sages, and apparently it turned out a lot of people wrote exactly about that, sort of the relationship between Israel and the nations of the world and all that. And it's not just a general, be a good Jew. They go into great detail about something that has to do with how we relate to one another. Like everybody likes to put this line on a sticker, after kamocha, right? But nobody actually lives this way. And yet Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of all time, said, this is the one general rule of the Torah is this. Forget all the other mitzvahs and all, it's this. And everybody says, yeah, we'll get to it. And he said, no, start with it. So we're putting the question, is it something to do with the way we relate to each other? We're just asking, when two people get a divorce and the whole household falls apart, it's not because of something between them didn't work out. It's not like the world made us divorce each other.
I know a lot of things that I would like to have differently, or I would like us to be different in relation to. I'm very unhappy with these internal convulsions. It poisons my life. It's not a small thing. I thought then when this war broke out, I thought the people with BDS, the BB derangement syndrome, would put their hatred aside and just join and just put a shoulder under the stretcher, as we say in the military idiom, and join forces to fight this war. But instead, they said that Bibi is worse than Hamas. And that people like me, it's ironic that the left always says, "Oh, you guys know which side of the bread the butter is on. You are cozy with the ruling party." There's no coziness when you are on the right and you work in elite environments like the media. I'm a screenwriter. I did a few TV dramas, radio, media, university, academia. You are ostracized. I used to make half my living doing lectures. That has almost completely dried up because people don't invite you. Not to mention the amount of violence. It's rhetorical, but I've never been beaten. But the hate that is directed at you is enormous. social media has just embolden people to be even more vulgar. And so, I suddenly run into a picture of myself in an SS uniform with a swastika armband. Someone went to the trouble of photoshopping me into a picture of Heydrich or someone, and that's that's deranged, because whatever it is that, and I don't like libel suits. I'm supporter of freedom of speech, even when it's really jarring. I'm totally against all these hate speech laws. But once I went to court with someone who's actually a high-ranking reserve officer in the Navy, not a young man, retired Navy officer, who called me Dr. Gebos. What? They can't resist because it's doctor and then something that starts with G. And so I just made a point of it, and I threatened with a lawsuit. And in the end, we settled outside of court and with an apology. And I made a point of saying that you can criticize me, you can insult me, you can call me a son of a bitch, you can whatever it is. But if you're going to step over the line and label me as a Nazi, then I'm going to go after you, because I think there should be some limits of decency. And the guy, whoever it was that published on Twitter, myself in an SS uniform, is hiding behind an anonymous sandal, so I can't find them. Because if I did, after the first moment it was published, I would pursue this one, and I would pursue this one in court.
Gadi, tell me something. You're what? You're like almost 60?
Well, I wouldn't say almost 60. I still have like 6 months until I'm 60.
Oh, okay. So in all those years, I'm sure you've asked yourself, what is this, who you are, we all get to those questions, right? Of this, the identity and what am I? And clearly, you're Israeli, you speak the language, some would say you're Jewish and all that. The question is,
I would say I'm Jewish. Absolutely.
So the question is, if, and we asked it to almost every guest that comes here, we ask if an alien landed and he asked you, how would you define this tiny group of people that takes up so much, draws so much attention and wields so much influence and really disproportionate amount of influence and attention. I mean, to say it's not so, to say we're making this up, it would be ridiculous. It's factual. How would you explain that, or how would you at least define that group to an alien? What is Jewish? What is that? Do you have a definition?
Yeah, it's for me as a Zionist, it's actually not that complicated, because I would say that it's a nation, and it was unique in that it was that very early on it was both a nation and a religion. But to my mind, the nation is the enduring component. It is also the common component, and you don't have to accept that definition of Judaism, of course, because if you are Haredi or ultra Orthodox, then you don't think of Jews as a nation, but you think of them as a religious community, and you can be both. But if I were to try and explain my group, why I am a Jew, I don't get up in the morning and ask, oh, what is a Jew? Am I really a Jew? It doesn't, because Zionism has made this natural for us, because we live in a public sphere that represents our national culture, which is what democracy does, right? It channels the common culture of the public into a public sphere. It's more complicated in immigrant nations, but with Jews, we also have a common past. And so so I don't find myself scratching my head and thinking what a Jew is any more than someone Italian might, wake up and ask themselves, what does it mean to be Italian?
Right, but that's part of being a Jew, right? It's this we're unable to get rid of those questions.
That's Weizmann's observation, Chaim Weizmann, who said that a Jew is someone who has a complicated answer to the question what a Jew is.
Oh, okay. Finally, we have a good answer to that complicated question for which nobody has an answer. We got to close, but I feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface. So first of all, I would love to have you again sometime and kind of dig into things if you have the time, if you're not too famous for
Pleasure.
us. I want to ask you, and maybe everyone hearing, because this is one thing that we did, where we were able to get some good answers on it. Like, what's good about being Jewish? What's good about being a Jew? Like, maybe that one thing, because I feel, I'll just say this, the preamble to this question is that we are a little bit like fish in water. So we don't see the water, and we're certain that everybody lives in the water and knows how to swim and can breathe in the water, and we don't necessarily see it. So maybe if we remind ourselves what's so great about being Jewish, and then we can sort of convert that into quality that the rest of the world can enjoy from, and maybe it's something that we're not already doing. So maybe tell us what's so great about being Jewish.
I don't think it's great. I don't think it's awful either. I think every people have unique traits, and I'd like to make Judaism great again, but you can go.
You need a bigger hat. It doesn't know.
Yeah, but anyone can go ahead and make being Japanese great again. So I think the common thing is that everyone wants to be themselves, or the freedom to be themselves. And I don't get up in the morning and I mean, sometimes I do. Sometimes I have moments of reflection, but generally I don't get up in the morning and say, is it good to be Gadi Taub? It's just the way I am, and therefore I try to make the best of it, And the same goes for being Jewish. It's very important to me, but that's not objective. It's important to me, and I look very critically at people who are Yodim. Some of my best friends, by the way, like my father. My father was a refugee. He was not a survivor from the Holocaust. He was a refugee from Nazi Germany because he was a child of 12 in Bratislava, when the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, and it's 1939, and nobody thought of a Holocaust yet. But he convinced his father to come to Israel, and then they arrested him here after 4 months at sea. They arrested him and his father, and then his father joined the British Army, and my father went to a foster home and then a boarding school, and then joined the Palmach, and then lost half his hand, 4 fingers, in the War of Independence, and then became a public servant. And then when Likud came to power, he was fired from a very high-ranking civil service job, and we could have been millionaires because he was the head of the Security and Exchange Commission. So it's a very coveted kind of advisor or partner for businesses. And my father said, I came here to build a nation, not to become rich. And he stayed in a minor job in the civil service. He was the CEO of Israel's only public publishing house. In Mossad Bialik, they made the Encyclopedia of the Bible and other important things. And he looked down at people who were leaving Israel, because we fought for this prize that we won with our blood, and at great peril and after terrible horrors, which is the greatest achievement of the Jewish people in 2,000 years, which is political independence. And you're just throwing it away because you think, I don't know, Berlin nightlife or Berlin chocolate milky desserts are cheaper, then you don't understand what this is all about. And there was a after the Amsterdam, I don't know, pogrom or the Amsterdam attack on Jews, there was Yinon Magal, who was a very funny guy. He has a show called The Patriots. It completely changed the landscape of the media. And so he put a video of this, yuppie young mother with her baby on, like, strapped to her chest, saying, "Oh, this country is horrible. I might move somewhere. Yeah, Amsterdam is not a bad idea." I guess she recorded that before. But that's actually a very serious thing to say. It's
No, it's narrow-mindedness. I think it's people who don't take a moment to learn history and to look around them and to really ask deeper questions.
Yeah, the state of Israel is a treasure that we cannot forsake, even if you choose to live in the diaspora. It's Zionism. Shlomo Avineri, who turned his back on me, used to say, he was my friend, used to say that Zionism set all Jews free, because for the first time in 2,000 years, diaspora became a choice and not a fate. And that's very true. And I don't think we can't afford to just give up on this project. And when I felt at the beginning of this war that it was in mortal danger, I woke up every day with a lump in my throat for all the way up to the beeper operation,
Yeah.
It was then. Now I'm greatly relieved, because I don't care about, and I said this, they asked me about Trump a million times on the media, and I kept saying, the question of what will be the Trump administration's policy towards Israel is secondary. The primary question is what their policy would be towards Iran, because that is the existential question. All the rest we can take care of ourselves. We will also probably need to take care of Iran ourselves, but with American backing. My arguments with Mike Duran on my podcast, it almost got into a fight in one episode where he said, "Look, you can't do it alone against Iran. You can't." And I said, we need to take the risk, even if it puts Israel's existence in danger, because if Iran gets the bomb, we are doomed. And so we must try. Yeah.
On this optimistic note, I want to let Seth go, because he has to run. We'll stay just another 2 minutes. I know you also have to go. But Seth, you go. I can wrap it up with Gadi.
Gadi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Seth.
I really look forward to opening this up. I feel like we just got to the good stuff. Okay. Good luck, guys.
So thanks, Seth. So, on this optimistic note, I want to, we ask our guests to read a short quote from our Jewish sages. If you don't mind reading, I posted it in the chat. It's from Rav Kook. I'm sure you're familiar with him. So if you read that, and then we'll wrap this up.
Great is my belief. Wait, it just disappeared. Great is my belief that all this global uproar of a time of the shifting world in which we live in has come essentially only for Israel. We are now called upon to carry out a great task willingly and mindfully, to build ourselves and the entire ruined world along with us. Well, I don't know that it is up to us to the extent that Rabbi Kook believed, but I do think Israel now has a task, and it's to help the West reconstruct its conservatism and its devotion to its own values. And part of the reason why I think we are in a position to do it is, first of all, we are at the forefront of the war between civilization and barbarism. And the West has been framing this conflict for years now in terms that put us on the wrong side of history. We were the colonial remnants of Europe in the Middle East, and the Palestinians are the Indians, right? The Native Americans, sorry. They are the natives of the Middle East who have been oppressed by Western colonialism, and it's the Jews who did it. And that's not true. Radical jihadist Islam is attacking the West on many fronts. It is a barbaric, uncivilized, wild, sadistic, and racist creed that burns gays and treats women as property. And it so happens that Israel is in the forefront of the fight against the leaders of that dark, evil, Nazi-like ideology of the mullahs in Tehran. And if Europeans don't think that this is a danger to them too, they just don't get it. And so when Netanyahu gave his speech to the joint session of the two houses of Congress, this is what he tried to say. We need to change the framing. And he said, our war is your war. Our victory will be your victory. Our enemy is your enemy. And I think that on this axis, it's an opportunity to turn around the idiotic, puristic, or the whole woke worldview, which has classified Zionism as evil and oppressive, to turn it on its head, to see that Zionism is actually leading the war of the West against those who want to destroy the Judeo-Christian heritage.
So it's funny. You took a whole 2 minutes to actually agree with Cook. It is up to us, and somehow, in some weird way, the fate of the world, of the Western world at least, is tied up with the fate of Israel. So
I'll take your interpretation then.
Okay. We need to talk about the woke thing. I think we need to talk about how we're doing it, how to actually do what you just explained nicely here. I hope we'll get to talk more about it. Gadi, thank you so much for coming here to the Jew Function. I think I learned a ton. And I listened to your stuff already, so I already also learned a ton, and I'm sure people who don't listen regularly to your stuff learn a lot. What's the name of your English podcast?
It's called Israel Update, and I do it with Mike Duran, who used to be on the National Security Council in the Bush administration and is now a senior fellow at Hudson. So it's featured on Tablet magazine.
Okay, so that's the tablet connection. Okay, great. So we'll put the link to that in the description. Please, we don't have Gadi's fancy 1 shekel a day model yet, but we will settle for a like and a share and a comment. And also, if you just listen to this on Spotify, just put a review, anything to get the word out. This is the future of changing people's minds. Independent media, talks like this, and going into places where nobody else will. So, thank you, Gadi. Thank you, everyone. This is the Jew Function. We'll see you here next time, and we are out.